Today I want to discuss a very important aspect of the metronome dApp, and that is the peg management of its MS assets. So this was brought to my attention in our community chat, and usually, when people see higher rewards when it comes to non-impermanent loss related pairs, namely ETH or USDC, they get a bit spooked because the general rule is the higher the reward, the higher the risk. So we're gonna tackle this specific topic today, and I wanna also discuss the health of the protocol itself. Now, before I jump the gun, I just want to say that I am currently heavily invested in Metronome and all its related dApps, because Metronome is being used, so the assets that Metronome produced are being used on other dApps. So in all aspects overall, I am kind of invested, so I just wanted to put things out there just for people to understand that I'm not just talking about a protocol that I haven't tested nor that I have invested in. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into the health factor of the protocol currently. So you have two chains that Metronome is deployed on. You have ETH and you have OP. So again, if you're not familiar with how Metronome works overall and its amazing feature called smart farming, I have videos on this. Links will be in the description below. So going on Ethereum, currently right now, you have about 4.5 million worth of dollars in MS assets minted. All right, so that's both MSUSD and MSETH. Now, why do people mint those assets to begin with? So why do people deposit collateral to mint them? Because you can leverage them on CurveFi. Now, CurveFi is the leading DEX on Ethereum. All right, so there's about 1.5 billion plus in total value locked. So there are three pairs on CurveFi that you can use these MS assets in. You have two ETH pairs, Frax ETH, Wrapped ETH, and you have one USD pair. It's actually a tri-pair. So there's USDC, I think, USDT, and MSUSD. Not 100% sure. Now, within each of these pairs, there's a weight to one of the assets in questions, or in the case of the third pair, three assets in question. So if you factor all of this by the TVL of these pairs, you're gonna have a total in regards to the MS assets only of 4,353,000. So almost all the MS assets minted are being utilized in CurveFi, meaning there hasn't been any trading going on, so people didn't buy the MS assets on Curve, but they rather minted that, and they're using those assets on CurveFi to farm additional CVR rewards and LP rewards. And that brings me to the ratio between the total value locked on Metronome on Ethereum and the MS minted assets, and that's about 157.3%, which means that in theory, all right, but not in practice, it's over collateralized, right? Remember, when your specific collateral ratio drops to a certain level, then you are liquidated and those assets are sold to cover your debt. So in theory, there's more there right now because the market is up, so that's completely logical. So again, logically speaking, people are not driven to sell those assets on the LP pools on CurveFi, but when they want out, they will just close their positions. So in this case, if we're discussing Ethereum, volatility when it comes to the MS pairs isn't quite there, and I don't think there was a moment in time where this happened and the MS assets depegged. The only incident was the curve exploit, which is completely normal. All right, so instead of people rushing to close their position, they just sold on the LP. Now transitioning into optimism, and actually one more note before I do so, the only way MS assets will be sold is through smart farming. If you recall how smart farming works, because you're kind of looping, you're borrowing, selling, then reborrowing, so on and so forth. Again, so transitioning into optimism, you have three MS assets right now that you can mint that are worth using, of course. So MSUSD, MSETH, MSOP. So all of these assets minted are about $3.92 million worth. Again, these numbers fluctuate because the base assets, you know, are moving up and down following the market, of course, and their native pairs. So you can use those assets in both Velodrome, which is the leading DEX on OP, and XtraFi, which is a leverage yield farming protocol. If you don't know what XtraFi is, I have 2 videos already on the project, more like 3 I think at this point. I'll leave links below. You can also check them out on the channel. Pretty cool protocol, cool user interface, to be honest. So 3 pairs in total on both Velo and Extra. You have 1 ETH pair, 1 USDC pair, and 1 OP pair. And those are non-impermanent loss pairs, meaning you're pairing MS ETH with ETH, MS USD with USDC, and MS OP with OP. Factoring the TVL and the weight of these MS assets within those pools, you have about $4.1 million overall. So, and also, I also added the lending pools on XtraFi because XtraFi also has an MS ETH and an MS USD lending pool. So those are also MS assets being used on the protocol. So all of these things together, and then you have a total of 4.1 million overall. So that tells me that if you ratio it out, 95.31% of all MS assets, right, are being, you know, leveraged through minting on metronome, and only about 4.69% were actually traded. And that brings me to the idea that overall the TVL to MS assets minted on Optimism is 142.6%. So smart farming plus closing positions on XtraFi could be cause of volatility overall, and that would incur transactions, so buy sells on the LP pools. And that drives me to my most important, you know, bullet point here, and that's peg management, because all of these things were to tell you how healthy metronome is currently. So there isn't like hundreds of billions of dollars and so many transactions being made, because currently you can easily rebalance peg, or basically repeg through the LP rebalance overall, which is the ratio between the MS asset and its native asset. So if the ratio was 1:1, if the MS asset drops a bit, then the ratio will shift towards its favor, giving it let's say 1.05 versus 0.95. So balancing LP pools is something that, you know, would cause the peg to go back up. And like I said, and this was mentioned, about 5%, so 4.69% to be exact, of, you know, OP related basically MS assets were bought and not minted through metronome, and that would give you the added volatility that you could see on OP right now, because yes, there is a slight volatility, so the MS assets are slightly sometimes dropping below peg and going back up, and also going above peg, so on and so forth. So in addition to the aforementioned, so the LP rebalance part, if people see that one of these MS assets has dropped, you know, slightly or significantly, or so on and so forth, that will incentivize them to buy up these assets from the market, so pushing the price back up through buy pressure, and then they would incur a profit if they repay those tokens on metronome. Because remember, on metronome it's always 1:1. So if you borrowed 1000 MSUSD, but then you get to buy up, let's say 1050 MSUSD for the same amount, then you incur the profit of 50 MSUSD, which you can add back to your capital, deposited, and borrow more, or just keep it to farm more on the DEXs. So this is the idea overall if we're comparing the protocol health versus how peg management is being kept, because these topics are often very confusing to me as well, honestly, because you have to look into what causes things to, you know, go south or go north, and how things adjust in the end. And it is quite stressful if you have an open position on XtraFi, because if peg drops a bit, one day you'll be in the green, then you go in the red, and then you panic, or maybe not panic, but ask yourself what's going on. So this is what's going on. Short term, things could be volatile, all right? But long term, things will be okay. And this is, I think, the point of the video at the end, that no matter, you know, your approach to these things, and no matter your risk tolerance, always remember that you should be long-term oriented and not short-term oriented. All right, short-term oriented is Ponzi thinking, not actual DeFi thinking. And with that, I'll add one more thing. We have a very cool room called DeFi Ascension. Feel free to join us. Lots of cool people, like-minded individuals, mature investors. We discuss so many things. We're welcome. We're welcoming everybody with open arms. You'll have a good time. Feel free to join us. With that, see you in the next one. Have a good one.